Thank you both for coming through.
Thanks for having us.
So when I saw the name, I said, I love that name. I mean, it's such an easy name off the tongue, but I also loved it for what it is attempting to do, to argue to the extent that the law has made politics, or is it the other way around, the extent to which politics has made the law? Which is which? Let me begin with you, Judge.
Well, I think what the book was really about, largely, Lawfare is this idea that, not just in South Africa, but throughout the world, we're seeing as politics collapses, people rush to the law because they've got no other alternative. So if you look at South Africa, with the failure of legislative oversight of the executive,
right,
with the failure of the Hawks and the police and the NPA and SARS, where did people have to go to actually have their complaints dealt with? Not on the streets, which would normally be the case, or Parliament. They went to the courts.
But what I also found interesting was that you didn't just look at the post-democratic era. You also went back into the days of apartheid, and you looked at cases where, again, you had that collision between the two.
Well, that's the weird thing, isn't it? Our history repeats itself. Because under the apartheid era, look, there's no question, there's a huge difference between the society we live at the moment that we're talking in and the apartheid society. But frankly, the parallel was that politics failed in apartheid society because everybody was locked up. So the only choice people had at the time were the courts, and it was a very narrow avenue. But what we wanted to suggest was just the extraordinary role that law has played in a country where politics never worked properly.
There's some people like me who get uncomfortable when judges are making law, but we'll come to that and we will argue about that a little later. Just how difficult was it to write the book, especially a book spanning such a long period of time?
The biggest challenge was obviously selecting which cases to focus on. Because we had to select from the apartheid period, and then we selected in the constitutional era. And so from the discussions that we'd been having, we tried to think through what cases would be the best examples of a point we wanted to make about how law got used. So that took a lot of discussion to decide. And then we were very fortunate because we got to interview a lot of the people involved in the cases. The judges, the lawyers, the clients even. And we got to then get the stories, because the cases are just someone's story that we're trying to tell.
Net, when you look at the impact of the law on politics, what did you find? Did we end up in a better place as a result of this collision, or are there still things that ought to be dealt with that perhaps will require a little more work?
Obviously, we would say that it's complicated.
It is complicated.
There are two sides to it.
You're reminding me of a friend of mine who broke up with his girlfriend, and then he was, how is it, man? I says, it's complicated. This is complicated.
So on the one hand, what you've got is, obviously, as Dennis described, when Parliament, Chapter 9 institutions, the law enforcement system, when everything else isn't working, there's a temptation to go to court. And that means you put a big burden on the courts to try to do what should have happened somewhere else. The flip side, of course, is that the courts in the constitutional era have a very important role to play in building the society that we all hope for, that we all agreed to in 1994. And they, together with all of those other institutions and the media and engaged civil society, active citizens that know what's going on, we need everybody to then build the society that we all signed up for.
Your own thoughts, Judge?
Yeah, that's right. You see, I think the point about it is that, long after we solved corruption in this country, we're still going to be wrestling with a problem. How do we build a non-racial democratic society? And what's the mix between what the courts can do, what politics can do, and what ordinary people can do? And in a sense, what this book's about, in a way, it's not a sexy thing like saying, oh, well, Ace Magashula, is alleged to have done X. This is a book which seriously asks a question. How the hell are we going to get somewhere down that destination? Now, the courts unquestionably helped us. Why? Because if you take the courts out, if you say over the last 10 years, the courts had rolled over and done nothing, and there hadn't been the judgment in the Kandla, there hadn't been the judgment in the arms deal, the nuclear deal, etc., we would have been in a much worse place. So what the courts did was to buy us time. And the time now is to spend actually reconstructing.
In what condition do they remain post that bruising battle that we saw in the last decade or so?
Sorry,
the courts.
Well, I think the courts are now in a position, which is a really interesting question, is what is the court's role going to be in a society going forward where, in effect, politics may be more responsive to the needs of the public. In other words, when we talk about this revitalization of politics in South Africa.
Absolutely.
Now, in that situation, it seems to me the courts have come out of this with more legitimacy than any other institution in South Africa.
Is that something that you agree with? Because one of the things I was thinking about was this court case where the DA went to the Constitutional Court to ask that the minutes of President Jacob Zuma's firing of, I think, who was it? Was it
the big cabinet reshuffle
should be made public. And I felt very uncomfortable as a layperson where now you have the opposition in part, sort of, if you like, ruling by the back door, which is one of the issues that you address in the book.
Absolutely. So there certainly are limits where the turn to courts becomes something negative and something that you don't want to encourage.
Exactly.
And that's precisely the point.
Did they overstep at any point?
I think that that case in particular shows you that where outside of courts people are unhappy with something, they try to find a legal route where they can't get something in Parliament or they're not yet at the ballot box. So there's this frustration that builds and then they resort to the court. So for example, I got several phone calls from people who were unhappy with the electoral lists and saying, can't we sue to have these people taken off the lists before the election? And who
so
are
now
you
the courts decide who is going to be representing the people.
Precisely. That's the ultimate quintessential political question. And on that case, to be specific, the appointment of your cabinet is probably the essence of your presidential executive
100%.
power.
The people to deliver my mandate from the people who elected me.
Obviously, we still want it to be in furtherance of the constitutional vision, though, and rationally exercised and for all the right reasons. But it really is a case that crisps up that tension, and it says, can you have judicial scrutiny of the very essence of a political choice?
Yeah, that matter is still outstanding, right?
It is
that's
still
why I'm careful not to talk about it. But if I could say this in a general point, of course your concern is correct, and it's very good that you raise it, because there is a temptation when judges get these political cases to say, oh, we can fix the world. Judges can't fix the world.
Which is my next question was going to come from, and I've been told we've got 1 minute and a half. I wanted half an hour for us to go through this.
But
We'll come back.
We'll have to do this at the weekend. The issue of precedent, to what extent were the courts able to handle this one without impinging on those separation of powers and also creating law, as I always argue in my limited way in understanding the law? You don't want people who are unelected to be making all the rules, right?
You don't. But on the other hand, you also want elected people to work within the confines of the law.
Yes, of course.
And so the really interesting question that you raise is, where does the boundary lie? And in South Africa...
And how well did they do?
And in South Africa, there's no question. Let's put it at its most mild. We pushed the boundary as far back, in other words, for judicial scrutiny as we could. And again, the reason why, which we document in the book, because of the failure of politics.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm being told, no, you have to stop, time is up, done. But thank you both for coming in. And thank you for writing the book. I shall now go chapter to chapter, read it properly, because now I had to snatch at it in order to get the gist of what you guys have written about, which I couldn't do justice to because there are many things to learn there. Judge Dennis Davis and Michelle Roux, the authors of Lawfare,